The Rock and Roll Unraveled Show. I'm Derek Shelmerdine. Welcome to another Rock and Roll Unraveled show. Now, in this show, we're going to be taking a look at the Manchester beat groups. These are going to be the big ones who found international success. And they're going to be the Dakotas, Freddy and the Dreamers, Wayne Fontana and the Mindbenders, Herman's Hermits, and the Hollies. They all have very different stories and are a great testament to the Manchester beat groups of the first half of the 1960s. But to begin the story, we'll take a look at the Dakotas. Now, they found success after signing up with Brian Epstein and working with a new Scouse frontman, Billy J. Kramer. But the story goes back to Pete McLean, and around 1960, the Drovers morphed into Pete McLean and the Dakotas. Well, on the 2nd of February 1962, Pete McLean and the Dakotas debuted at the Cavern and were apparently the first Manchester band to actually play at the Cavern. And on the 26th of July, a really interesting gig, Pete McLean and the Dakotas were at Cambridge Hall, Stockport, and also on the same bill that night was Billy Kramer and the Dakotas. Well, the future was in hand at that point. In early 1963, Brian Epstein asked the Dakotas to back Billy Kramer, so they parted company with Pete McLean, and he formed Pete McLean and the Clan. So we'll stay with Pete McLean and the Clan for a while. And they played the Cavern Club in Liverpool on the 5th of July, 63, and also in the July released their only single, Yes I Do. Well, it failed to trouble the charts, but it was co-written by Pete McLean. And he's the guy that famously turned down an offer from Lennon and McCartney to write some songs for him. But in sort of early 1964, Pete McLean hooked up with Four Just Men. Now, they backed Pete McLean as well as operating on their own. Now, they were a Mersey beat band. They'd started out in the early 60s in Liverpool and using names including D. Fenton and the Silhouettes. And in early 1963, they decided to relocate themselves to Manchester. And when they arrived at their new adopted Manchester home, they renamed to Four Just Men. And on the 3rd of May, 64, Pete McLean and the Four Just Men played a gig at the Palace Theatre in Manchester supporting the Rolling Stones. Now they're still on the road. There's still a good chance to see Pete McLean and the Clan. But going back to the Dakotas, as I said, in early 63, Brian Epstein asked the Dakotas to back Billy Kramer. And that was because Billy Kramer's group, the Coasters, didn't want to turn professional. And they became Chick Graham and the Coasters. But Billy Kramer, he hooked up with the Dakotas. And the Dakotas had a recording contract in their own right, a separate contract. And it was John Lennon who suggested the addition of the J. So they became Billy J. Kramer and the Dakotas. And then Manchester group, the Dakotas, found a lot of success as a Mersey beat group. Now, this was the time the beat music was breaking all across the UK. And it was very much the Beatles and Mersey beat groups who were the first to find commercial success. And they were closely followed by the Manchester-based beat groups. Billy J. Kramer, the Dakotas, was the first of these with Do You Want to Know a Secret on the 2nd of May. And he had 6 UK hits, 2 of which were number ones, and that was between 63 and 65. But it's great. The B-side of Do You Want to Know a Secret was I'll Be On My Way. And both sides actually credit McCartney and Lennon rather than the more familiar Lennon and McCartney songwriting credit. Now, the Dakotas had their own recording contract, and in the July, they released their first single, The Cruel Sea, produced by George Martin. It was actually their only UK hit, and they failed to have hits in their own right in the States when the combination with Billy J. Kramer was finding itself very successful over the pond. And that was all about the British invasion that started in 1964. And this was when British groups and artists absolutely dominated the American charts up until the end of 65, early 66. And it all started with the Beatles in January 64. They found themselves at number one with their first Capital single. They were there for 7 weeks. That was I Want to Hold Your Hand. And on the 9th of February, they had their legendary debut appearance on the Ed Sullivan Show. Now, the first American hit Billy J. Kramer and the Dakotas had was in the May of 1964 with Little Children. That's a Schumann McFarland penned song, but the B-side was also a hit, and that was Bad to Me, Lennon McCartney. Now, they had 4 hits in the American charts, and they were all in 1964. Some really interesting combinations of hits these bands are having. More about that with Freddy and the Dreamers. Now, the last UK hit for Billy J. Kramer and the Dakotas came on the 20th of May 1965 when Trains, Boats and Planes entered the charts. That gave them a number 12. But then a couple of years later, the September of 67, Billy J. Kramer and the Dakotas, well, they parted company. And the Dakotas themselves split up after Brian Epstein's death. But they did reform in the mid-80s. Now, what's great about today is that just about everybody we're talking about is still on tour. Now, sadly, we just missed Billy J. Kramer. He played a gig in the Roslyn Hotel in New York on the 2nd of March. But the Dakotas, wow, they really are out and about. And you can see them pretty much all over the place in the UK. They've got from the 5th of April to the 6th of June next year. And they've got lots of great activity going on. It includes the sensational 60s experience with Mike Pender from the Searchers, the Fortunes, and the Swinging Blue Jeans. Now, Pete McLean and the Clan are gigging fairly regularly, but there are no dates listed for them at the moment. Now, you can actually find details for all of the people we're going to talk about today. You can find details of the dates and venues, and there are links on my website to exactly where they are and what they're doing. And that's at rockandrollunraveled.com. And that's rockandrollunraveled.com. But to start us off, from 1963, here's the Dakotas' only hit. It gave them a number 18, and this is The Cruel Sea. The Dakotas might have found fame as a Mersey beat group, but Freddy and the Dreamers, homegrown Manchester. Now, Freddie Garrity started out in the skiffle group the Red Sox around 1957. They sort of became the John Norman Four, then the Kingfishers, and in late '59, the Kingfishers changed their name to the Dreamers Rhythm Group. And towards the end of 1961, the Dreamers Rhythm Group had morphed into Freddie and the Dreamers. So in May '63, they had their first UK hit with If You're Gonna Make a Fool of Somebody. Gave them a number 3. And that was a cover of a James Ray R&B hit in 1962. Now, Freddie and the Dreamers had 9 UK hits across 1963 to 1965. And in May '64, they were actually joint headliners with the Rolling Stones on a UK package tour that also included Dave Berry and the Cruisers, Millie, and Mark Peters and the Silhouettes. Now, covers play a really big part in the beat group repertoire. As you see, an awful lot of the songs that took these groups to the top were covers of American R&B, doo-wop, and blues songs. And in November '64, with their 7th UK hit, they managed to get to number 5 with a cover of the doo-wop classic I Understand. Now, that's got an interesting history because it started out in 1954 by a group called the Fortunes. That was an R&B top 40 song. And the G-Clefs covered it in 1961, and that was a doo-wop classic. And what the G-Clefs did, they sort of interwove Auld Lang Syne into the arrangement. And if you're interested in hearing those two versions, check out my website, the blog for this particular show. There's always an accompanying blog for the shows, and there are links to videos of the two versions. And the website's rockandrollunraveled.com, and you'll be able to hear the two particular versions, as well as the Freddie Garrity, Freddie and the Dreamers version. Now, on Christmas Eve, 1964, the Beatles opened their Christmas show at the Hammersmith Odeon, who ran till the sort of middle of January. And Freddie and the Dreamers featured on that, along with Jimmy Savile, Sounds Incorporated, Elkie Brooks, the Yardbirds, and the Mike Cotton Sound, the great band of the time. They had their first American hit in March of 65, and that was I'm Telling You Now. And it gave them a number one for a couple of weeks. And Freddie Garrity co-wrote I'm Telling You Now. And what's interesting about this was that the song was originally released on Capitol in October 1963, whereas this hit version was on the Tower record label. And a lot of these bands were releasing singles in America long before they started having hits. I mean, Billy J. Kramer and the Dakotas, for instance, Do You Want to Know a Secret? They released that back in 63 as well, in the June. But it wasn't until the Beatles had their first American hit, I Want to Hold Your Hand, in January 64, that the floodgates opened and the British invasion started, and all the other UK bands started to have commercial success in America. Now, Freddie and the Dreamers' UK hit situation is really quite a surprising one when you look at the hits themselves. They had 4 American hits, including 1 number one. That Tower version of I'm Telling You Now was the one that gave them their number one, and that entered the charts on the 27th of March 1965. Just a month later, on the 24th of April, I Understand on the Mercury label entered the charts. And on the 15th of May, again less than a month later, they had 2 records hit the charts on the same day. One was Do the Freddy on Mercury, and the other was You Were Made for Me on Tower. And that was their 4th and last American chart success. So all 4 of their American hits were across a 3-month period. What's even more bizarre is that the last hit, You Were Made for Me, the B-side, So Fine, was actually by the Beat Merchants. The record company had accidentally pressed the wrong B-side. So if you want to check out the Beat Merchants, hunt down an American copy of You Were Made for Me. Now, they had their last UK hit in November 65, Thou Shalt Not Steal. And it was their 9th UK single. It managed to get to number 44. But they were a very, very, very entertaining band. And not surprisingly, found themselves in pantomime in December 65. They were at the Palace Theatre in Manchester, in Aladdin, along with Des O'Connor, Barry Sisters, Jack Douglas, Billy Dainty. Now, they were all household names at the time. But by December 1967, and they were back in pantomime, this time in Stockton-on-Tees in Cinderella. But this time around, it was a very minor cast that they were playing with. Well, Freddie and the Dreamers disbanded around 1968. And Freddie revived the Dreamers, though, in the early 70s, but sadly died in 2006. But the Dreamers themselves are a very, very active band, and you can find gigs for them across the UK, and the dates listed from any time you like now to the 6th of March 2020. Now, their first UK hit back in May 1963, as I mentioned, was a cover of James Ray's R&B classic. And this is the original James Ray version of If You Gotta Make a Fool of Somebody. You're listening to Derek Shelmerdine with the Rock and Roll Unraveled show. We're taking a look at 5 of Manchester's finest beat groups. Before continuing with the story, an opportunity to win a copy of my book, Rock and Roll Unraveled. But first, congratulations to Jenny Jones from Chester, who successfully answered last month's question. Well done, Jenny. A copy of Rock and Roll Unraveled, a signed copy of Rock and Roll Unraveled, will be with you very shortly. This month's question: who was the lead singer of Herman's Hermits, who went on to find considerable solo success in America? Well, the book, Rock and Roll Unraveled, tells the story of rock and roll from its roots to mid-1970s punk. And that question again: who was the lead singer of Herman's Hermits, who went on to find considerable solo success in America? To enter, simply go to my website, rockandrollunraveled.com, go to contact, send me an email with your answer, and the winner will be announced on the next show on the 6th of May. I'll post the book to the lucky winner anywhere in the world. Good luck with the competition. If you're listening to the show after the closing date of the 5th of May, no problem. Just go to my homepage, rockandrollunravel.com. There's a different competition every month. Just follow the links and answer the current question. Well, meanwhile, back at the plot, Wayne Fontana was born Glyn Jeffrey Ellis in Manchester on the 28th of October 1945. Now, the inspiration for his stage name came from Elvis Presley's drummer, DJ Fontana, rather than, as is sometimes suggested, from his record label, the Philips subsidiary Fontana. Now, Ellis, Wayne Fontana, started in a skiffle group, the Velfins, with some of his little school chums in the late 1950s. And by the early 60s, he'd formed Wayne Fontana and the Jets. And on the 26th of January 63, Wayne Fontana and the Jets supported the Beatles at Macclesfield's El Rio Club. That sounds like an interesting place. On the 4th of May, big break basically, Wayne Fontana and the Jets auditioned for Jack Baverstock, the Fontana A&R man and producer. Now, Wayne Fontana and his bass player Bob Lang turned up for the gig, but the drummer and guitarist both failed to show up. So Wayne Fontana invited guitarist Eric Stewart and drummer Rick Rothwell to stand in. Well, they passed the audition, but there was a proviso that the record contract was for the 4 musicians who'd actually performed. So they decided to change their names, and they chose the contemporaneous Dirk Bogarde movie, The Mindbenders, for the new name of the group. Now, they're the first UK hit in July of 63 with Hello, Josephine, and that was a Fats Domino Dave Bartholomew song. And the B-side, Roadrunner, had a writing credit for E. McDaniel. Well, of course, that's Bo Diddley. So lots more fabulous cover versions going down. Now, Wayne Fontana and the Mindbenders had 6 hit singles between July 63 and September 65. You notice the whole beat era dying away in 1965. And on the 13th of November 63, they played a really interesting gig called the R&B Show at Sheffield City Hall. And the Rolling Stones, the Big Three, and Wayne Fontana and the Mindbenders all had sort of equalish top billing, and they were supported by some local Sheffield bands, including an early Joe Cocker gig, and that was when he was Vance Arnold of Vance Arnold and the Avengers. Now, their third UK hit was another R&B cover. This is October 64, and it was a cover of Major Lance's What a fabulous title for a song. And in February 65, they had their biggest hit with their 4th single, Game of Love. That got them to number 2. And it was Game of Love that actually took them into the American charts as well in the March of 65. And that was actually the only American hit as Wayne Fontana and the Mindbenders. It was their only one, but it was number 1 for a week on the American charts. And their final single, the 6th single, was very much their UK swan song, and that was September 65. And that was She Needs Love, got them to number 32. Now, on the 30th of October 65, Wayne Fontana famously walked off stage at the Pavilion in Buxton Gardens, Derbyshire. And the following day, the band split up. The Mindbenders stayed together. That was Eric Stewart, vocals, guitar, Bob Lang, bass, and Rick Rothwell, drums. And Wayne Fontana went on and formed The Boys, which he renamed shortly afterwards to The Opposition. But what's interesting is if you look at the artist credit on his solo singles, they're only credited to Wayne Fontana. And his first solo single was in December 65. It was Easier to Hurt Her. And he had four UK solo singles, 65 and 66. And the Mindbenders' first solo offering came out in January, A Groovy Kind of Love. Now, that was a cover, not very well known, original of Diane and Anita in 1965. And they also had four hits, but those were slightly later, from across 66 and 67. Now, A Groovy Kind of Love also gave them their only American hit in the April. And on the 4th of July, a significant day for an American tour, they opened in Atlanta. And James Brown was headlining that particular tour. Well, Wayne Fontana's swan song came with his fourth single in December 66, and that was Pamela. And the Mindbenders, well, their last single was almost a year later in the September of 67, and that was a cover of the Box Tops' The Letter. And the Box Tops gave themselves number one for 4 weeks on the Billboard Top 40 with that particular song. Great song. I always loved the Box Tops and their version of that. The Mindbenders were really coming towards the end of their career. But in March of 68, Graham Gouldman joined the band. He replaced Bob Lang, and the Mindbenders' final gig came at Liverpool Empire with the Who on the same bill. Now, Eric Stewart and Graham Gouldman, well, they went on to great things. I mean, they formed Hot Legs. They opened the Strawberry Studios recording studio, and they teamed up with Lol Creme and Kevin Godley and formed 10cc. So they went on to some serious success. And again, you can see Wayne Fontana, and actually billed as Wayne Fontana and the Mindbenders. He's in the UK on the 15th of May, and then he's on one of these package tours with the Mersey Beats, Steve Ellis, Marmalade, and Herman's Hermits. You can catch them across the UK from the 27th of November to the 15th of December. Now, Graham Gouldman is still with 10cc, and they're all over the place. From the beginning of April through to 24th of August, you can catch them, or possibly, in Russia, they're in the UK, Belgium, Germany, Denmark, and back in the UK. So, good opportunity to catch 10cc. Now, for the Wayne Fontana song, I thought we'd go with the Wayne Fontana version of what was an original from Major Lance. And this is the fabulously titled Well, let's take a look at Herman's Hermits. Certainly the most commercial of the Manchester beat groups we're considering today. Peter Noone was born in Manchester on the 5th of November 47, and on the 11th of December 1961, just about a year after the show started, he made his first appearance on Coronation Street as Len Fairclough's son. By 63, he was in a group called the Heartbeats, and they morphed into Herman's Hermits. And Barry Whitman joined them in April of 64. Now, they had their first UK hit in the August of 64 with I'm Into Something Good, and that gave them a number one for a couple of weeks. It was a Goffin and King song and produced, like all of their work, by Mickey Most. Now, they had a string of 20 UK hits from August 64 through to November 1970, and they were the first of our Manchester beat groups to survive past the birth of rock music in 1965-66. Now, I'm Into Something Good also gave them their first American hit. It didn't fare quite so well there. They gave them a 13, though, and their first American visit came shortly afterwards in the January of 1965. And while they were there, they made a cameo appearance in the movie When the Boys Meet the Girls. That starred Connie Francis and also featured Sam the Sham and the Pharaohs of Woolly Bully fame. That was a UK hit in '65. Also in the movie was Liberace and Louis Armstrong, quite an eclectic mix of music there. In America, they had a string of 18 Billboard Top 40 hits from November '64 to February '68, and most of their American songs were R&B covers, novelty songs, movie songs, and it's quite an interesting array, really, if we take a look at some of those. On the 17th of April '65, they actually had two singles enter the Billboard Top 40. Mrs. Brown, You've Got a Lovely Daughter, which actually wasn't released in the UK, but that gave them a number one for 3 weeks in America. That was their third single, and their fourth single was released on that same day, Silhouettes, and that was a cover of an original R&B song by The Rays. Gave The Rays a number three in 1957, and their fifth single was another cover. It was Wonderful World, originally by Sam Cooke in 1960, and they followed that in July of '65 with I'm Henry VIII, I Am. And that was their second and last number one. It was the number one for a week there. Now that was written in 1911 and popularised in the UK by Harry Champion. The ninth single was a track called Listen People. This is February '66 now. And that comes from the movie we were talking about earlier, When the Boys Meet the Girls, and that was written by Graham Gouldman. Their 10th single in April '66 was Leaning on the Lamppost. Now that was from another movie, and that movie was actually starring Herman's Hermits. They were, a little bit of a walk-on in the first one, as it were, but this one they were the main guys. And on the poster, it stated introducing Peter Blair Noon. And the song was recorded by George Formby in 1937, so they certainly had a penchant for bringing some of the old British music hall songs to the American charts. Now, their last US hit came in February '68. It was their 18th, gave them a number 22, and that was I Can Take or Leave Your Loving. Now, the last two singles they had in the hit parade in the UK were in 1970. Either end, basically, 7th of February and the 14th of November, they entered the charts. Now, the first one was on, actually their last one on Columbia, Years May Come and Years May Go. And then they moved over to Rack Records, and their last UK hit was Lady Barbara. And you can see the writing on the wall because that was actually credited as Peter Noon and Herman's Hermits. Shades of Rod Stewart and the Faces there, I think. Now, Peter Noon left Herman's Hermits. They parted company in '71, but he only had one UK solo hit, and that was in May of '71. Oh, You Pretty Things, written by David Bowie, and again, of course, produced by Mickey Most. And Herman's Hermits are on tour, and that includes Barry Whitwam. They're in the Package Tour Sensational 60s tour in the UK from now basically to the 28th of April, and then in April to 8th of September they're in Norway, Denmark, Germany, UK and Australia. These boys certainly get around. And then 27th of September to the 15th of December you can catch them on another one of these fabulous package tours, 60s Gold Tour. That's all the UK, and they've got dates in the diary as well for next year, from next January the 10th to May the 8th. And what's great is that Peter Noon is also on the road. Now, he goes out as Herman's Hermits, starring Peter Noon. And he's doing a UK tour from the 17th of March to the 24th of April. So you can actually see Herman's Hermits and Peter Noon, but not on the same stage, at a venue near you somewhere in the UK. And then he's off to America, US and Canada, and he's on tour there from 27th of April to the 24th of November. As usual, for all the dates and venues, just check out my website, rockandrollandraveled.com. Now, close your eyes, think back to 1965, and you can hear Herman's Hermits. But this is the original. This is the Rays 1957 version of Silhouettes. To finish off, we're going to take a look at the most successful of our 5 Manchester beat groups, and that's the Hollies. Graham Nash met Alan Clark in 1947 when they were around 5 years old, and that was when they were together at Ordsall Primary School. Now in 55, they formed their first band, the Two Teens, and by the early 60s they were Ricky and Dane, and then they teamed up with Eric Haydock in the Deltas, and the Deltas morphed into the Hollies. And they're the only one of our Manchester beat groups to go into sort of continued success in the 1970s and beyond. And what we're going to do today is just have a look at the Hollies across the 1960s, slightly beyond Graham Nash's tenure with the band. What would really say was the golden age of the Hollies. Now, they had their first recording session on the 4th of April 1963 when they covered a Coasters song, Ain't That Just Like Me? Now, the Coasters had recorded that in 1961, but surprisingly, it was never a hit, either a top 40 American hit or an R&B hit. But the Hollies certainly took the song into the British hit parade in May 1963. It was their first UK hit, and it gave them a peak at number 25. And they had 20 UK hits across the 1960s, including one number 1. And their first album came out at the beginning of January in 1964. That was called Stay with the Hollies. Their 6th UK hit's quite an interesting one. This was September 1964, and it was called We're Through, and it was the first side to have a writing credit for L. Ransford, and that was actually a songwriting team between sort of 1964 and 1966. Graham Nash, Alan Clark, and Tony Hicks wrote together as a songwriting team and published them under the name of L. Ransford. And talking of publishing, they actually formed in 65 a music publishing company called Gralto Music. And that was taken from the names GR from Graham, AL from Alan, TO from Tony, Gralto. Now, when Graham Nash moved on, the music company became Alto without the GR. And their 8th single in May of 65 gave them their only UK number 1. That's I'm Alive, and it was there for 3 weeks. Now, their 9th UK single was also their first American hit. In the UK, it hit the charts in September 65, and that was Look Through Any Window. And it was January 66 when it took them into the charts and reached number 32. In America, they had 7 Billboard top 40 hits across the 1960s. And that might have been their first US hit, but it certainly wasn't their first UK single. Mentioned before that a lot of the bands had been releasing singles in 63 and 64, and the Hollies were no exception. In January of 64, they released Stay, but it failed to trouble the charts, and that's the one that was written by Maurice Williams and was gave Maurice Williams and the Zodiacs a number 1 in America. It did also give the Hollies a number 8 in the UK. It was their 3rd UK single in November 63. Now in 1966, around April, Eric Haydock parted company with the Hollies, and he was replaced by Bernie Calvert. And the Hollies' music was evolving as well. In June 67, they released Evolution. Now that's a highly rated psychedelic album, and it features a couple of legendary drummers. Session drummer Clem Catini appears on the album, as does Mitch Mitchell, Jimi Hendrix Experience drummer. And in October 67, they released Butterfly. In America, it was called Dear Eloise and King Midas in Reverse. Well, a clumsy title. But it was the last album with Graham Nash, and their 18th UK single was the last single with Graham Nash, and that was October 1968. It reached number 11 in the UK, and it was written by Tony Hazard. He wrote the A-side, Listen to Me, and the B-side, interestingly, the writing credit goes to Clark, Hicks, and Nash, and that was do the best you can. And it's interesting to note that it was listed by the names rather than as L. Ransford. Now, the swan song for Graham Nash came on the 8th of December at a charity concert at the London Palladium. And he moved on and formed, obviously, Crosby, Stills and Nash. And there are many reasons why he was leaving. I mean, they were moving in different musical directions. The Hollies was much more commercial, and Nash was more into the sort of psychedelic new rock sounds that were particularly coming out of the West Coast in America. And he also wanted to move away from the joint writing credits of L. Ransford, as we can see on the final B-side. He wanted to have his own writing credits. And Nash actually recorded some demos with David Crosby and Stephen Stills. And the Hollies tried to record Marrakesh Express, but it never really worked for them. Anyway, he was replaced by Terry Sylvester from the Swingin' Blue Jeans. And their final hit, their 20th single, and the last one in the 1960s, was in October of '69. And that was He Ain't Heavy, He's My Brother. And it was written by Bobby Russell and Bobby Scott and inspired by the Boys Town community in Nebraska, with the two brothers statue which greeted visitors to the community. And that statue depicts a boy carrying his younger brother on his back and inscribed with the motto, "He ain't heavy, father, he's my brother." And on that single, you'll actually find Elton John playing the piano. Now, again, the good boys are all on tour, well, some of them. The Hollies with Tony Hicks and Bobby Elliott. You can find them Germany, Netherlands, Belgium from the 6th to the 30th of April, and then Norway, Finland, Denmark, and the UK from the 5th to the 21st of September. Graham Nash is on the road as well. He's in America from around about now. That finishes on the 4th of April. And he's then in France, Germany, UK, and back in America, 28th of July to the 29th of September. I'll just say it one last time. For details of all the dates and venues, just check out the website, rockandrollandraveled.com. Now, that's really moving towards the end of the show. And just to summarise, you could see that 1965 was very much when beat music was coming to an end. And one of the things that was coming to the fore in the UK were mods and rockers and the new mod culture, mod bands. Well, that's it. I've been Derek Shelmerdine. You've been listening to the Rock and Roll Unraveled show, and that was the story of 5 of the more successful Manchester beat groups who found fame across the pond. I hope you've enjoyed the show half as much as I have in putting the whole thing together. If you're into social media, you can find me at Twitter at RNR Unraveled and Facebook at Rock and Roll Unraveled. Well, I hope you can join me again next time for another look at a little piece of rock and roll unraveled. And to play us out, the last single with Graham Nash. This was their 18th hit. It got them to number 11. And this is Graham Nash's swan song, The Hollies, Listen to Me.